You were on your way, moving into a space you knew you should belong. Along the way, you were stopped by someone, given the authority to intimidate you into believing that you, in fact, were in a space where they could tell you you did not belong, where you would never belong. And if it were up to them, you would shrink down and simply disappear.
All right, so Fred, it's interesting. We're here at Prairie View, and we're friends, and I see your social media, and so it's nice to be in your space. And I want to tell you something. The pandemic was in 2019, and around that time, Malcolm Gladwell published a book called Talking to Strangers: What We Should Know About the People We Don't Know. Here's the book, I got it. Mm-hmm. And there's a chapter in it where he talks about Sandra Bland. And I did not know that, I didn't know the story of Sandra Bland to the detail, right, that Malcolm Gladwell writes in his book. And so the fact that, was she getting a job or something? She had done an interview at Prairie View, something like that?
From what I understand, she was actually coming for an interview at Prairie View.
Okay.
So this was like her drive in, and this happened with her right here at the edge of campus, coming into the campus for an interview.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, so that connection, and as I reread that chapter as I was coming to Prairie View, and I thought there were some connections that Gladwell wrote about that to me seem very much similar to higher education. He talked about how Sandra Bland had a visual pat down by this officer. This police officer assumed the worst, right? Was out to catch her doing something, was surveilling her. Oh, you did this, you didn't do that. And to me, higher education, folks of color, we're subjected to visual pat downs all the time. Is he or she or they, are they in their office? When are they in the office? What are they doing in terms of their teaching and their research? We're constantly being surveilled. So this notion of being patted down seemed to be similar. And I guess I'd like to ask you, what are your thoughts about higher education, being what's it, for lack of a better word, just being watched. Mm-hmm. And how does that contribute, or how does it help or hurt a sense of belonging as a faculty member?
Very recently, I saw the movie Emmett Till. And so before the movie started, pretty much true to form with me being an egghead, being a scholar, so I pull out my phone, and my colleague was like, I know you're not gonna text during this movie. I said, actually, I'm not texting. I want to take some notes. Like, take notes. I said, I want to capture some of the most poignant quotes from the movie. So here and there, I'm gonna just like type down these quotes because I want to remember them. So the very, very first quote that really stood out to me, Mamie Till told Emmett, she said, be small down there. So basically she was telling him, when you go down south, when you go to Mississippi, be small. Don't be bigger than life that you're allowed to do here in Chicago. Mm-hmm. That stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And with you saying that about faculty, a colleague of mine, he noticed, I posted on Facebook that, I captured these quotes, and the quote that really stuck with me was the very first quote, "Be small down there." So my colleague said, you know what, you and I haven't written together in a while. We need to write about the hyper-invisibility of black faculty. So that whole notion of what we have to do to be small, particularly being black faculty in the white academy.
For sure, for sure.
So,
yeah. And, you know, part of the visit here is to continue our work on our forthcoming book. Dr. Charles Strayhorn, you, myself, putting together a book for your book series. Can you tell me a little bit about your book series?
So my book series is Diverse Faculty in the Academy. So I pitched the series to Routledge several years ago. And the reason that I wanted this series is that I wanted to give faculty, particularly diverse faculty, not just black faculty, not just Asian faculty, not just Hispanic faculty, the range of faculty that represented the diversity in the academy. So I wanted to provide them with a forum to be able to talk about the major issues, to tackle those topics that are near and dear to their sojourn in the academy. So, you know, what does it mean to be Hispanic faculty at a PWI? What does it mean to be African American faculty in the PWI context? So I wanted faculty, particularly diverse faculty, to be able to have a forum, to have a platform, to have a space where they could just come and talk about all the issues that were unique to their experiences being people of color going through the predominantly white academy.
This video, we want to put together a video that is a continuation of our first video.
Yes.
And one thing I enjoy much about you know, my mentorship from you is I'm always learning. And viewers of this video, you want to find people that can teach you. Where do you see belonging right now within higher ed and literature? Like, what should scholars be writing about?
Sure. That's a very good question and a very deep question when you think about the whole notion of belonging. So we have our dear friend Terrell Strayhorn, who's co-editing this book with us. So he's done a lot of work related to sense of belonging and what that means for students of color, particularly black and brown students. So the whole notion of sense of belonging. But what I really love about what you have done is that we need to think about what belonging means for faculty of color, for diverse faculty, because this white space that we navigate, this predominantly white institutional space, we suffer from some of the same ills, some of the same travails, some of the same issues that the various students that we teach suffer with or that they have to tackle. So I think that this book is important, and to your point, we're talking about belonging because some of the research that I've done, and actually some of the presentations that I'm doing right now, particularly some of the consulting that I'm doing with higher ed institutions, many of them want me to come out and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I found this really interesting article that talked about how we missed the fourth base. It says DEI, DEI, DEI. All we hear, all we talk about is diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the article said, and it gave this really interesting model. You know, in higher education, we love our models, we love our schematics. So it was these intersecting ovals. So it was a Venn diagram, basically. So you had diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the article said, if you do it the right way, diversity, equity, and inclusion, at the center of that should be belonging. And it says that we miss that piece. It's not just DEI, it's DEIB.
Yeah, you know, one thing it's clear to me as we've, you know, talked with doc students here in the Mach 3 Center, there is deep belonging because those doc students know and feel supported. You know, and being supported, and whatever that form, right? It could be research support, it could be mentorship, it could be what have you. It's clear that they're supported. You know, similarly, I think the students where I work at Berea College feel supported because they can come to the Ed Studies department and receive whatever they need. Sometimes they need to just do a puzzle. Sometimes they need to talk to a faculty member. Sometimes they need to get support for a conference. And so to me, it seems like it's not really complex. But as a person of color, when I come into higher education spaces, universities, colleges, sometimes I don't feel a sense of belonging in the sense that I feel like the gaze is negative. I have to explain my behaviors. You know, people don't understand me. Do you have any suggestions of how we can explain ourselves in ways that we still feel like we're validated, but might help us educate our colleagues?
To your point, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging it doesn't have to be complex, but it's complicated. And it's complicated by the fact that each one of those constructs has multiple dimensions. It's multidimensional. When you talk about diversity, you know, it's beyond just numeric. When you talk about equity, it's beyond the distribution of power. Who has the power? You know, what is power? You know, when you talk about inclusion, who's included? You know, what are the metrics that you use to determine if inclusivity has been met? So each one of those constructs, they're complicated. They have dimensionality, they have depth, they have meaning, and it goes beyond just the surface. So when you look at it on the surface, it looks like, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, this Venn diagram, and at the center is belonging. So if you just check the box with each one, then belonging should just naturally fall out. Well, not so much. We have to, two terms that I use in my doctoral courses all the time is, I tell my students I need you to problematize and deconstruct. And what I mean by that, we talk about issues all the time, you know, issues. I mean, everyone has issues. People Magazine has issues. How do you take an issue and translate that issue into a problem? Because a problem is something that you can solve, that you can attack. So how do we create, how do we find, how do we distill a problem out of this particular issue or issues? So problematize, and then the deconstruction piece is, I tell my students, you never take theory in whole chunks. You have to deconstruct that theory to determine, does it apply to you? How is it normed? I was like, many of these theories that we use, particularly in higher education, did you know that these theories were normed on predominantly white populations many times?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that for a moment. Like, so when we talk about belonging and faculty members, there are folks who just teach and they're professors. They're also administrators. So thinking about that, I'd like to read something here. Encinia, not sure if I'm pronouncing it, Encinia is the police officer. So, to Encinia's mind, Bland's demeanor fits the profile of a potentially dangerous criminal. She's agitated, jumpy, irritable, confrontational, volatile. He thinks she's hiding something. You know, the first book that I did in your book series looked at racial battle fatigue. And, you know, I could envision a situation where an administrator might see behavior and not fully understand what's going on. Racial battle fatigue might be at play. You know, Sandra Bland, she was smoking a cigarette, and that really upset the police officer. The police officer said, "Hey, can you put the cigarette out?"
You mind putting out your cigarette, please? Don't mind.
I'm in my car, but I have to put out my cigarette.
Well, you can step on out now.
I don't have to step out of my car.
Step out of the car.
Why am I-
Step
No,
out
you
of the
don't
car.
have- No, you don't have the right.
Step out of the car.
You do not have the right to do that.
I do have the right. Now step out or I will remove
I
you.
refuse to talk to you other than to identify myself. and
Step
talk to you.
out or I will remove you.
I am getting removed for a failure.
Step
to-
The
out.
police officer didn't know and perceive smoking a cigarette as actually a pro-social activity. She was trying to calm herself. And so I wonder, higher ed, if it doesn't really understand how faculty of color experience, which is, by the way, why this book series is important. If higher ed doesn't understand how faculty of color experience these different types of institutions, PWIs, MSIs, then they're seriously disadvantaged. So with that being said, how do we, to use your term, create this, problematize this so we can solve it, or we can go attack that problem. So if the problem is lack of understanding, what's the problem that we build, and then how do we attack that problem?
So I would say, if we look at a lack of understanding, we have to start at a place of educating and providing knowledge. A lack of understanding comes when you haven't been provided with knowledge, you haven't been provided with information. So how can you get to understanding if we don't have like a base of knowledge, a base where we're teaching from to impart knowledge to get people to the point where they can begin to understand and unpack and to crystallize what this experience means. You're not going to understand what I go through if you don't first understand who I am. So I would say the whole notion of understanding, we have to get at what knowledge are we providing to help people understand, to help them see what this experience means for a faculty member of color. Some faculty members, I don't have to think outside of my own cultural sphere because this is who I am. This is my identity. I mean, I'm traversing, I'm navigating this academy. I'm a professor. I come here, I roll up to my parking spot, I walk in the building, I go and teach my class, and that's the way it is for everyone. What do you mean your experience is something different? So because folks have not been provided with the knowledge to even take pause to say, hey, this experience might be a little bit different for Fred because he is an African-American male. Well, what about being an African-American male makes his experience potentially different? Well, so as I start to talk about, racism, when I start to talk about oppression, when I start to talk about coming from a place where I was told that, you need to make sure that you do twice as much just to be considered to be on par with your colleagues. So I'm walking into this space thinking that, I can't do the status quo. I've got to be the superhero to ensure that I am doing those things that would show that I've gained the intellectual capital, that I have actually done the things that warrant me even being here. Well, my colleagues next door, I don't think they're going through all those machinations trying to figure out, let me make sure that I'm always on point. Let me make sure that I'm always perceived as being competent. I can just walk into my class and teach my class, with a clear mind and a clear conscience that, I'm absolutely prepared for this. This is what I do. Well, I can't do that just like some of my colleagues can do that, in the sense that I have to go through all these filters to go, did I prepare lecture notes? Did I prepare a PowerPoint? I mentioned this in an article that I did years ago for the Chronicle of Higher Education. It's called Black Faculty on the Track but Out of the Loop. And one of the points that I made in that article is that Black faculty, many times we feel like we have to put on a show. And I titled that particular category, that theme, Let Me Entertain You. And I talked about how very early in my career, I can remember that I would come into my class, I would come in with the PowerPoints, I would come in with all the slides, with all the lecture notes. Each class, I wanted to make sure I had an activity, all these things. Now, some of that comes from the fact that I'm a higher ed person, but I'm also K-12 trained. So a lot of the stuff I do in the classroom, learning, teaching style, learning styles, comes from my K-12 background. But a lot of that was part and parcel to this fact that I felt like I had to go over, above, and beyond for students to feel like, oh, he's prepared. And that was not just in my mind. The one semester that I decided not to do all this stuff, I said, you know what? I'm just as competent as my white colleague next door. So let me try what he does. I'm going to come in and sit down with my coffee mug, sitting on the floor, and I'm going to pontificate for 3 hours. I know my stuff. I know my craft. And I can make it interesting. I'm not just talking fluff. But the students at the end of that semester say, you know what? I was so excited about taking Dr. Bonner's class, but this semester it seemed that he wasn't prepared.
Yeah, and the course evaluations. Yeah, absolutely. The area where Sandra Bland was stopped, and from what I've gathered and learned, there's a memorial that was put up or some type of signage in commemoration. There's also a street that was changed in her honor. When you think of that situation, she shouldn't have been pulled over, but she was, and ultimately she died in jail, which is sad. I wonder if there's a parallel. How many Sandra Blands are there in terms of faculty members of color in higher ed? The ones that had one bad experience. It might not have been literal death, but maybe it was professional death. Maybe they left higher ed altogether, and their wisdom and experiences were never able to fully be used in the classroom. We see a lack of diversity in faculty positions and hiring. What do you think will change the system in terms of these unequal outcomes, these inequities? What will lead to positive outcomes?
So when I think of outcomes, going back to some of our seminal theories in higher education, one theory that I always put out in front of my students, particularly those in higher education, because I'm like, this theory is considered to be the cornerstone theory of college student development. So what we do in our field in higher ed student affairs is student development. So at the core of student development is this theory, Lewin's interactionist paradigm. And Lewin was like one of the forerunners in sociology. So his theory says that behavior is a function of the person times the environment. And I think that theory is super powerful because it talks about any behavioral outcome that you have is a function of the individuals, the people, and the environmental context. I think it's powerful because it can be applied in so many different places and spaces. So to your question and to your point, I think the outcomes that we seek to have, we have to look at what are we doing for the individuals, for the people? What are we doing for Black faculty? How are we helping them to develop and grow? What do we know about them? What are we learning about them? What are we looking at the experiences, the engagements that they're bringing to the higher ed context? So as we're looking at the P's, Black faculty, what do we know about them? Do we know, some of them might have experiences at HBCUs, and what does that mean for their education? And the P's, what are we doing for white faculty, white administrators, the white institution? So are they ready to receive these faculty members of color? Are they open? Are they willing to learn? Are they willing to look at doing things differently?
Yeah.
So maybe you have faculty members that some of the things that you did or that you have been doing need to be changed because you have faculty coming from very different experiences.
Yeah, and to me, it's not impressive of leadership at colleges and universities to simply hire. I want to see, do they retain those faculty? How long do they stay? And do they promote within? Do they develop? What is ultimately these faculty members' sense of belonging within those spaces? Because to feel like you don't belong or you're kind of isolated and alienated, I'm really interested in Asian American leadership in higher education. Namely, I'm in teacher education and in chairs and dean positions. And we're actually, a colleague, Rachel Endo and I, we're looking at the experiences that Asian American deans have, experiences that assistant deans have, associate deans, chairs, and we're actually applying critical race theory to our analysis, because I think that the resilience needed to continue working in racially hostile environments is taxing, causes racial battle fatigue, as we know, leads to health outcomes, mental stress, physical stress. But those aren't success stories, those are survivors. I really would be interested in understanding how we can cultivate supportive spaces for the faculty, staff, and students at all different types of institutions. Because I think ultimately if someone feels that they belong and they have what they need, it's a healthy environment. I've been really thinking about toxicity, because when you think about it, a racially hostile environment, that's not healthy. It's not healthy to anyone. Whereas a more healthy environment would be one that has interracial, intercultural understanding. Colleagues would understand and have friendships with those they work with, just based on how many hours in the day they work. But you've worked at different institution types. You're at an HBCU. You've worked at PWIs, different types. What is the secret sauce to having a good sense of belonging or a healthy environment? Is it really the leadership? Is it, what contexts help shape that, in your opinion, or in your experience?
So I think it goes back to, it's interesting, I'm gonna go back to Lewin again, because I use that particular theory, that model, with so much of what I do in higher education, because I tell my students all the time, I said, teaching higher ed, I said, I like to go back to some of the foundational information, foundational theories that really ground what I do, what we do in this field. So again, going back to Lewin, behavior is a function of the person times the environment. When I use that across each one of these places and spaces that I've been in, and you mentioned I have been in a Hispanic serving institution, my time at UT San Antonio. I've been in PWIs, Texas A&M, Rutgers University. My first job at a small liberal arts college in Louisiana, Centenary College. My time at Bowling Green State University, and now my time here at Prairie View A&M. But in each one of those spaces and places, again, I hold to that notion of behavioral outcomes are a function of the person times the environment. So who am I as an individual in these particular environments? And that's the one thing that's really powerful about that particular formula, is that it says that the P, you may not be able to change the P. I am who I am in each one of these environments. So me, the P, is going to stay the same. But what has changed? The environment. So my behavioral outcomes, who I am, how I've been able to be successful, how I've been able to navigate those particular environmental spaces, they have led to me having some successful outcomes. So I have been able to, in each one of those spaces, I have tried to distill the positive things about those environments. And essentially, I think that's what we do, whether we realize it or not. You find things in those environments because, again, the P is the same, the P is me, but what I can manipulate is the E. And in those environments, I try to find those safe places, those safe spaces, those safe individuals who affirm who I am, who affirm what I'm doing. And those people and those spaces exist from the whitest institutions, from my time at Texas A&M, to my time at Rutgers University, to my time at Bowling Green State. In each one of those places, I can tell you in those environments, I would find those alcoves, those enclaves, those communities, those places where I felt supported. And I think that we really discount many times the importance of environment. Here at Prairie View, I mean, the environment is important here as well. You know, people, they assume that because you're in an HBCU that it's a monolith. It's not. You know, Black folks, the Black diaspora is just as diverse as any other cultural group. So even here in this HBCU space, in this environment, I've had to find safe places and safe spaces and people who affirm who I am and what my identity is. And I think that's also so very important.
You know, off of that point, I was just at Iowa State University talking with department chairs, and they said something that ties into what you just said. They said, you know, we did programming and it worked for kind of this cohort of students. But we're noticing that those same programs aren't impacting this cohort of students. And to me, that indicates, of course, humans are diverse and that programming needs to be responsive. That's the good thing about higher ed. We constantly have to be innovating. Innovation is largely why I was really adamant about doing videos with you, because I feel as though as academics, we can do our books, but videos like this are much more engaging.
Absolutely, absolutely. That innovation piece is also very important. So much of what we do, and we had a conversation about this, we have to take what we do in the Ivory and Ebony Tower. So being here in this HBCU space, I want to take that term and appropriate it in ways that are appropriate for us. So this Ebony Tower that I'm in, we have to take what we do here in this space and translate it and break it down and put it into digestible bites for public consumption. Because so much of what we do here with the theory, I mean, the frameworks, the models, I mean, it's very, very important. However, if it's not translatable, if it's not transformative, if it's not well, let me use some of our good qualitative research. Qualitative research is transferable. Quantitative research is, generalizable. We want work that is transferable to the community. I see the work that we do in this space. We are public intellectuals. We have to have our work that is consumable, that can be consumed by the public in ways that are going to transform their lives outside of the Ebony and Ivory Tower.